It's week 11 and I'm in Victoria Park. Hi everyone, welcome to the week 11 feedback video. Okay, so I'm in Victoria Park in downtown Kitchener, out for my morning walk, and want to take you all with me to talk about week 11. Okay, week 11, penultimate week of this class, and all about mixed methods research. And so, as usual, main lectures, discussion posts went well. Feedback is up online as in the usual spots. A few of you are posting and doing the main lectures now, which is normal. Many of you have completed the 8 video or 8 post requirement for each of those course requirements that I ask you for. But some of you still are, so that's great, and you got your feedback up as usual. And for the main lectures, I've picked my top 3 as usual and posted them under the week 11 content in Learn. Okay, so mixed methods research. Before I get into some of the nitty-gritty details and give you some more examples of it from my own research, I want to clarify a couple of terms that we use, because some of you were getting them a little bit mixed up. No big deal, but just so you know in future, so again, you can talk method speak with people and they have a good sense of what you're actually referring to. So when we're talking about multi-method research, that's more common. That's when you're doing different types of data collection and analysis within the same research orientation. So for example, if you're doing a multi-method qualitative project, that is where maybe you're doing some participant observation and ethnography, and maybe you're also going to do some semi-structured interviews, maybe even some content analysis of the groups or the organization that you're studying, what they put out on their website, or in terms of what materials they publish. And so that's what we refer to as a multi-method research. You're doing different types of qualitative methods, so various types of qualitative data collection and potentially analysis, and but it's all within the same research orientation. So that's multi-method research, and like I said, that's probably your more common type of research that's done, especially with qualitative methods. With quantitative methods, it can also be multi-methods within quantitative methods. So potentially you're running your own survey, gathering data, but you also want to go and see what others have done before in terms of quantitative data on your topic, and so maybe you analyze some StatsCan data along with it at the same time, and so do a secondary analysis as well as running your own survey. And so again, multi-quantitative methods, but all within the same research orientation. So that's what we're talking about when we're using the term multi-method research, which is slightly different than mixed method research. Mixed method research, I know it's confusing, but whatever, here it is, you'll get used to it. Mixed methods research is when you're doing different methods between and across research orientations. So, whereas multi-method research stays within the same research orientation, either qualitative or quantitative, mixed methods research does a bit of both, does quantitative and qualitative. So maybe you run a survey and then you interview some of the respondents in more depth to get at some of their answers on the survey, right? Maybe you're doing an ethnography and with an organization, and you also run a survey with some of its members, for example. So that's an example of mixed methods research, and that's what we were focusing more on this week in week 11, was the mixed methods side. Because typically, in methods courses, we will see quantitative and qualitative separately, but they can be done together, and there are some real advantages towards that, but also some things to think through if you are going to do a mixed approach. So, just look at my notes here. Just to give you a bit of, sorry, move the camera while I was doing that. Just to give you a bit of maybe kind of further examples of how you can do this mixed methods and under what context it typically takes place in the social sciences in Canada. I mean, you guys raised many examples in your discussion posts for week 11, which were great. And so again, worth going to read over that week 11 discussion board to see some of the ways that you've either already done mixed methods research or are thinking about doing. In my case, I've mentioned this throughout the term, my main area of expertise and the research I do is mostly quantitative. But I do some mixed methods projects, and they're typically in the context of research teams. So I didn't do mixed methods so much as a graduate student, but I started doing more mixed methods research when I started working in bigger research teams once I kind of, finished my grad school and got hired as a professor. And so and I work with a number of mixed methods team. In fact, the joke is I'm kind of like the survey person in a field where there isn't much quantitative in sociology of religion. And so anytime a team wants to gather like survey data or something, or want to analyze government statistical data, they call me, because there's very few of us who do quantitative methods in sociology of religion in Canada. And then I sometimes, if I can fit them in, work on a project with them where they're doing mainly qualitative research, often interviewing focus groups, especially some content analysis, and I kind of run the stat side of things. And so that's kind of the way I've experienced mixed methods research, and that I see it the most done in Canada in sociology and legal studies. I do see people who do both themselves, and I've done a little bit of both myself, but that's rare. What's more common is, you have a team. And the advantage of that is that with the bigger research team, your expertise is complementary, right? So you don't have to train in all the different types of methods. You can just bring people with different method skill together to do that mixed project. And of course, if you're running a research project, hopefully you usually have funding to do that, grant money. And so you also have some extra resources in terms of time and money, extra people, extra research assistants, extra money to actually go and collect all these different types of data. So a lot of the disadvantages we saw for mixed methods research in the textbook and in the readings from this week that many of you raised in the discussion posts as well, are actually mitigated by that team approach, or actually kind of, we solve them. The solution to the challenges is kind of bringing different people together with different expertise, getting grant money to have extra resources to do the mixed methods approach. And then you have most of the advantages in the team setting with fewer of the drawbacks of mixed methods. And so the kind of approach within mixed methods that I've typically taken with these research teams I work with, and I work with a large number of them, I think I'm at like a dozen projects or something at the moment, is more of a complementary approach with some triangulation and some facilitation, but mainly complementary if we're going to use the Bell et al. Terminology for different approaches to mixed methods. So often what will happen, like I mentioned, is that a team will want to gather various kinds of complementary data. And so that, for example, a few years back I was working on a project out west with a team in the Pacific Northwest in BC and the states of Washington and Oregon. And they were looking at religion, spirituality, and our relationship with nature out on the West Coast. And so they had already planned to do things like focus groups, some interviews, so focus groups with kind of members of the general public, some interviews with religious and spiritual leaders, and some archival and content analysis, especially of historical documents on the topic, because there are a number of historians involved in the project. And they also want to run a survey with the general population, and so that's where I came in, and that was kind of my responsibility, as well as some government data, statistical data on that project. And so it wasn't so much a facilitation, because we all kind of did the data collection at the same time, because we only had a few years to do this project, and so the practical realities of some of this mixed methods research. So it was more complementarity. That being said, we did all sit down a number of times at the start of the project and plan things out, and that is crucial to have a successful mixed methods project. It does require extra planning. It's one of the drawbacks, but also if you get it right, hopefully it leads to good outcomes at the end. And so you really have to sit down together and plan things out, not only for the ethics approval, which becomes suddenly a lot more complicated, but also to make sure that what you are collecting and analyzing is complementary, and is not kind of just all over the place, and that data that won't be able to speak to each other once you've collected it and you start the analysis process. There was some facilitation as well. I was able to do the quantitative stuff closer to the start of the project, because my ethics process is shorter and some of the statistical data I already had. And that analysis helped feed a bit, not the core questions of the interviews and focus groups, but some of the directions, some of the questions that the qualitative researchers want to pursue a bit more in depth. Sometimes it was a discussion with the research participants about the current landscape from the statistics and to get their thoughts on it as well. And so that's how that project went and how a lot of the projects typically go. And then some of it overlapped, some of the data collection from the different methods. And so that was when we could check for triangulation. We're like, okay, are we actually getting something similar from these various data? I mean, it's never perfect, right? No project is. And I do think it contributed a much richer set of data and set of findings doing it in a mixed methods approach. So I do think it was definitely worthwhile overall. But that being said, I have noticed that struggle of having difficulty getting the different data to speak to each other, even in just a complementary fashion. That struggle is real. Because again, this comes back to one of the more advanced readings from this week. It's not just the type of data that we collect that's a bit different, it's also what we're thinking, the way we're thinking about how we collect data and how we analyze data, and even our ultimate research goals, that is not quite the same when it comes to qualitative and quantitative. And that's coming from someone like me. Oh, sorry, I was just about to cross the road, but there's a car. That's coming from someone like me who actually is quite used to working with qualitative researchers and who knows their approaches quite well, both from my methods expertise, of course, but also just from working with a lot of qualitative people who don't know much about statistics. And even someone like me, who works a lot in both worlds, still struggles with that. And so, I mean, there was some discussions about, well, you know, what's the point of this data? Right? It's actually sometimes having to convince the other members of the team of the validity of the type of data they're not used to. So for example, often as the only quantitative person on a research project, what I find is that I'll go and collect good quality quantitative data, produce good quality findings, and the qualitative researchers always end up saying like, well, what's the point of studying this through my numbers? We want actual rich data. My response to that is like, well, you got rich data from 5 people because you have a super small sample size and, you know, typical disagreements or criticisms from each of the quant and qual perspectives. And so that I've actually struggled a lot with. Luckily, I'm not someone to get pissed off or angry about such criticisms, and so I'm just used to dealing with them by now, but they are real. And so even though a lot of qualitative researchers like the idea of a survey, one, they don't really know how to run one properly often, and two, when they actually get the results, the first kind of impression they get is like, oh, I just want to interview people to get more into depth in these results, rather than seeing the results as worthwhile in themselves from the quantitative side. So that's like a real kind of reality, training reality, perspective reality, that, you know, that difference between kind of more positivism and interpretivism that we saw in the readings this week. I mean, it's not quite that in my case, because my approach is not super positivist, it's kind of more soft positivist, but it is in the background of some of those disagreements. So what I found helps is that you kind of clearly lay out at the start what the plans are, what you can do with the different types of quantitative data, and double check that, yes, is this actually what you want to do, and how can they actually complement each other. So that's more planning at the start. And so, I mean, if as a grad student, you're not necessarily part of these big research teams yet, but you are able to use mixed methods approaches if you want and if you find that helpful for your research project. Of course, it's ultimately always what is your research question or a series of questions, and what is the best approach to answer those research questions. And maybe mixed methods is a good approach to do so. And I mean, it's much harder when you're one person, right? Especially at grad school, because you don't have a bunch of money to spend on different types of data collection. And as well, I mean, it takes extra time to become an expert in different types of methods, right? That training time is real, and it means there's less time to do other things, right? So if you're training in multiple methods, which I did during grad school, especially quantitative, but also qualitative, you have less time to read materials in your field, you have less time for your actual data collection and analysis and writing. And so that's something you should consider that isn't always discussed with mixed methods approach. But if you can fit it all in, I do know grad students who have, then it usually produces a better quality project at the end. Maybe it takes a bit longer to do the data collection analysis, but ultimately you can then get that complementarity, that triangulation, sometimes that facilitation through the mixed methods approach. So definitely something to consider. Not for a master's, for sure. You don't have enough time for sure for that. But for a PhD, something to consider. And I mean, it's not all PhD students who do it, and it's okay if you just want to stick with one type of method, but some do, and those who have, although there are times when it's frustrating and inconvenient, they've ultimately at the end found it worthwhile, because not only did they produce a better quality project with very different findings that are complementary and triangulate each other, but also they were then experts in different types of methods, which made them more marketable on the job market afterwards. So if there was a university who wanted a quantitative person or a qualitative person, they could apply legitimately to both types of jobs and say, hey, I'm actually an expert in both, I've published in both, I did both types of data collection analysis for my PhD. So something to consider. Always happy to discuss this more if you want to come by my office hours, if it's something that interests you. And I mean, I haven't talked a lot about facilitation yet as one of those mixed methods approaches, but also very relevant. And I mean, on other projects, not the one I was talking about in more detail on the West Coast, but say recently there was one we want to work on non-religion, and what it would look like is we'd run a number of surveys in a number of countries, and then from the survey samples we would find people interested in doing more in-depth interviews, and then we go on and do some interviews with those folks who are not really involved in organized religion. That's a classic form of facilitation, where the initial quantitative study, as well as highlighting some key issues with the survey data of what we should be asking in the interviews, also helped us sample for the interviews. It's not always easy to do, because often when you're running general population surveys, you're sampling with polling firms in Canada, because there's no other way of sampling in a representative way in Canada. Like, we don't have an electoral list that we can just pick at random from people's phone numbers and addresses like they do, say, in Australia or New Zealand. That does exist, but StatsCan won't let us do that for research in Canada. And so instead we have to kind of work with, say, Léger or Angus Reid, a polling firm, to buy a sample, a more representative sample of Canadians from them. And often the polling firms do not want us to contact the respondents after the fact to follow up in an interview with them. Polling firms are notoriously very protective of their sample, because it's kind of, they see they're in competition with other private companies for these people, and they don't like us kind of getting more information from people to follow up in an interview with them. It's possible, but often requires paying the polling firm more money and convincing them that we're just doing it for research purposes, that we're not going to like steal their people away from them. So I mean, again, something that you can do if you have more resources and know-how and know people in the field, and know people at the polling firms like I do, but not always easy to do, especially not as a grad student. So just giving you some of the kind of practical realities of doing that mixed methods research in Canada. But like I said, still a lot of advantages that were a part of all the readings this week, and so definitely something to consider when you guys are planning out your projects. But part of doing mixed methods research is that planning phase takes a lot more time and effort. So make sure you've put that aside and planned it out to make sure that the different types of data work together. Because often what I've seen is a grad student who wanted to do everything, wanted to do interviews, wanted to do a survey, you know, did part of that well, often the interviews, but didn't quite nail the survey landing, let's put it that way. Didn't really fully train properly in survey methods, and didn't really get how to do it in an adequate way, and so ended up just throwing the survey data out, or in one case put in their dissertation and got called out in their defense on it from me, saying that this was actually very poorly done and it wasn't very good quality survey data. And so don't do that. So just, you know, mixed methods approach definitely possible for a PhD, but at the same time, make sure you give yourself enough time to plan it out properly and to train properly in the methods you need in order to be able to do it. And if you do, it does pay dividends in the end. It does really give you some great quality, complementary, triangulated data that is really impressive, that is great for publication, and also that makes you more marketable on the job market afterwards with various different types of methods expertise. Okay, so I mean, again, it's one of the topics I could chat forever about. Could give you tons more examples of how it's gone over the years for me with mixed methods, but I won't. I mean, it gives you a bit of an idea, and again, I'm always around if you want to talk more about this. A couple of things I wanted to mention before we head out for this week. Just kind of getting close to the end of term now, so a reminder and some info. So thanks to all of you who came to the happy hour hangouts this term. We did a couple of them. It was great, really enjoyed hanging out with you guys, getting to know some of you better. I won't be doing any more now till the end of term, because I found in past years everyone's just very busy with end of term stuff, including myself, but also you guys. And so I find it's more stressful for people to also have a social event right at the start of December or something than not having one at this time of year. But what I did want to mention is there is going to be a Christmas party in the department that all faculty and grad students will be invited to in sociology and legal studies. Janice and Rena will send out an email to everyone for that shortly. The last I heard, it's going to be on December 19th, and it's usually, if it's that big of a gathering and party, it's usually somewhere on campus. But I mean, I don't know if things are settled yet, so rely on the info that comes to you by Janice and Rena in email. But do consider going to that party. It's a great way to celebrate the end of term, and again, to kind of get to know everyone a bit better, to chat to different people, that networking thing, right? And so, and there'll be some free food, which is always great. I won't be able to make that Christmas party. My holiday traveling already begins before that, unless they drastically change the date, which I don't think they will at this point. And so yeah, I won't be able to make it, but please do go. A lot of the other profs will be there. A lot of the other grad students will be there. So a great time to kind of chat and see how everyone's doing. De-stress a bit after the end of term before you go for the proper holiday break. And then the other thing to mention is the teaching evaluations are now live online. So also known as the Student Course Perception Survey, I believe. Also known as course evaluations. Anyways, it's you go online and you give feedback on how the course went, each of your courses went this term, and the profs get that feedback, and it is very helpful feedback. So please take a few minutes to go online. So it's uwaterloo.evaluate.ca. I put the link on the homepage of our Learn site there. And you've probably used it before for other terms that you've been here at UWaterloo, or if you're new, this is our usual teaching evaluation thing. And then you enter your Watt ID and password, and that leads you to a home page where you can see all the courses you've taken this term, and you select each one and get feedback. It's like a little questionnaire you answer, and then there's an open comments box at the end. So like I said, very helpful feedback for us to see how the term went with you. I teach this course pretty regularly, so it's always good to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, or the very good if it went that way. What you liked about the course, what you didn't. Pretty much most things in the course were under my control. Like, I decided to make it an online course because I thought it worked better online. I do the course syllabus, all the planning and stuff, and obviously my actual engagement with you guys and my grading. So you can pretty much comment on everything. It's always the kind of feedback that's relevant for what is under the professor's control. And I really do take that feedback seriously. I review it, I go over it, so thank you. It is anonymous, so I don't know who it's coming from, just so you know. And it also, for this course and for all your courses that you evaluate, goes towards professors' job performances or instructors' job performances here at the University of Waterloo. So please do take it seriously. Please do take the time to go and fill that feedback out. And yeah, it's much appreciated. It will be open. It's open now, and it will be open until December 3rd, which is the Tuesday, I believe. I'll give another reminder in next week's video, but just it only takes a few minutes. Please do that before the 3rd. And again, that feedback is very helpful and appreciated for me for the course this term. Okay, so that's all for me this week. Good chatting with you, and I will see you in the next and last feedback video next week. All right, bye everyone. Duckies! Duckies! Another ducky. Holding their own with the Canada geese. Little duckies! You're our post-credit seed! Woo! Bye everyone.